Today we're going behind the facade to the passions and politics that ruled at the court of Versailles, one of France's most recognizable palaces. And with over 7 million visitors in 2022, it is the third most visited monument in France, even more than ticketed guests to the Eiffel Tower, if you can believe that. This immense palace as we see it today was actually an addition built onto an earlier small, insignificant, and unremarkable hunting lodge built by Louis XIII in 1623. It was expanded by the incredible Louis XIV between 1661 and his death in 1715 to the insanely large and opulent palace we see today. So what you're going to see is our walk through the interior of the palace and all the pictures I took while we kind of meander through some of the trivia and tidbits that we may not know when we walk through and gawk at all this beautiful gilded opulence. One thing I found interesting was that Louis XIV actually opened Versailles to the public in 1682, when literally anyone could come inside and wander around at will as long as you were A, not armed, and B, wearing an appropriate hat and also a sword, both of which could be rented at the gate. So the commercialism hasn't changed much, although I'm always sort of curious, if you're carrying a sword, aren't you armed? But back then it was considered, the gentlemanly thing to do. Louis moved the seat of power and sort of his main residence out here in the same year, and construction continued. The gardens actually took 40 years to complete, but in 1685, his son, the Grand Dauphin, inaugurated one of my favorite spaces outside the amazing outdoor ballroom grove, which was the last of 15 different outdoor spaces in an area called the Groves, with an amazing celebration dinner in this gorgeous semicircular space full of cascading water and golden fountains. Looking beyond the golden opulence here, though, you will find a lot of personal treachery, emotional infighting, backbiting, mistresses. The mistresses alone could fill a library of books. Definitely worth looking into just Louis XIV's life. He famously said when his poor forgotten queen died that it was the only day she had ever given him any trouble in their marriage. He had 5 children with Louise de la Vallière, who retired to a convent in 1674 after a life of drama and actually overlapping somewhat with his next mistress. He had 7 children with Athénaïs de Montespan, whose long reign as his mistress ended when she fell hard from grace during a giant royal scandal, which also deserves its own book. It was called The Affair of the Poisons. Took place in the late 1670s when she was accused, basically on hearsay, based on a third party's confession, who said that she had resorted to black magic and possibly poisoning to keep the king's favor, which in itself is its own whole story. But the hard feelings lasted. When she died in 1707 at the age of almost 67, the king actually forbade their children from wearing any mourning for her. After a long life of many mistresses, Louis XIV eventually went on to secretly marry one Madame de Maintenon in either 1683 or 84, and she was incidentally the governess. She had been the governess of his 7 children by Madame de Montespan. Madame de Maintenon was his companion for the rest of his life, and her prior status as the governess of his children afforded her the rare privilege of being able to speak to the king without restriction and openly. So they had sort of a quiet end to what had been a fairly hedonistic earlier life throughout his reign. In 1741, our own Benjamin Franklin invented his famous Franklin stoves, and Louis XVI had them installed in the palace at Versailles, although it doesn't sound like this helped cut costs any. The expenses of running the palace and its maintenance was said to have been between 5 and 25% of the government income, kind of a wide range. But it, of course, led to the starving people deciding that the monarchy was the problem, so sort of the very existence of this palace contributed to the revolution and its downfall. In 1783, the American Revolution came to an end at Versailles with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which recognized America as an independent nation but also sowed the seeds of the coming French Revolution. So Louis XVI, in a way, threw himself under his own bus by helping fund a revolution to overthrow a king when we were freed from England, only to then be overthrown himself, culminating in sort of the highlight at Versailles, October 6, 1789, when more than 1,000 angry, hungry peasant women marched in arms the 12 miles from Paris to riot their way through Versailles, tearing down the 80-meter-tall gate with its 100,000 gold leaves to then rampage through the palace in search of Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and their children. Marie herself actually narrowly escaped them by slipping out of her apartment through a secret door. The royal family was still apprehended and taken, sort of their own accord, with the crowd all the way back to Paris and to their eventual sad ends on the scaffold there a few years later. The gate, incidentally, was rebuilt and restored in 2008 at a cost of 5 million euros, raised by private donations. A royal battle of wills came to an end here as well in 1772 when a very young Dauphine, Marie Antoinette, was forced by Louis XV to acknowledge his royal mistress, who Marie detested, Jeanne du Barry, and Marie only deigned to say, "There are a lot of people here at Versailles today," and that was enough to apparently smooth the ruffled feathers. La du Barry would go on to be guillotined during the Revolution. After the Revolution, the palace's many fine pieces of furnishings and artwork were taken away. A lot of them were sold in multiple lots at rock-bottom yard sale prices and distributed that way, or they were taken off to museums like the Louvre. Many were then restored back to Versailles from the Louvre during the following future restorations of the palace. If you visit here, one of the main attractions, of course, everyone knows about is the incredible 239-foot long by 34-foot wide Hall of Mirrors. This gallery is surrounded by 357 rare mirrors. At the time, the making of mirrors was sort of a secretive art, and the hall would have been lit for giant events in this space with 20,000 candles, if you can imagine. Looking past the crowds of all the gawking tourists, this would have been an incredible vision to behold at its high point. Although I did come across the fact that the Venetian mirror makers who worked on the Palace of Versailles were said to have all been assassinated, so they couldn't share their secrets, which I thought was an interesting bit of trivia. In 1871, the Hall of Mirrors witnessed France's capitulation in the Franco-Prussian War, and it was also in the Hall of Mirrors in June of 1919 that World War I was ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. The whole place included years and years of construction. The garden alone took 35,000 workers 40 years. The place covers 2,014 acres with 721,000 plus square feet of palace under roof, 2,300 rooms, 1,250 chimneys, 67 staircases, and just an incredible piece of architectural marvel. The Opera House here that was opened in 1770 was at the largest in Europe at the time, seating 700 plus people. When the court was in residence here, something like 5,000 people would be here, if you can imagine. 5,000 royals, nobles, servants, all housed on this property, and everything revolving around the ceremonial life of the king, the queen, and the royals. Louis XIV was responsible for so many protocols and ceremonials that were revolved around his life from the time he rose in the morning until the time he went to bed. Everything was a ceremony. By the time of Marie Antoinette, the queen, the protocol, the order of importance of the people who helped her get dressed was so complicated that there were stories told about how she would be standing there naked, shivering in a cold room, and one woman would have, unfold the dress and hand it to the next woman of more importance, who would warm it by the fire or whatever, who would hand it to the next woman. And if someone came in during the middle of this ritual who outranked the people already in the lineup, they would have to sort of reshuffle the lineup so that the person who was more important could take her part in the ceremony while Marie stood there shivering in the cold waiting to get dressed. I think Marie's dislike entirely of too much of this type of ceremony and lack of privacy is what sort of inspired her to spend a lot of her time at the Petit Trianon with her intimate friends and out at the hamlet that she had built, where she could wear the comfortable muslin garments that she tended to in her later reign and spend a little bit more normal life. Towards the end of the walking tour through the palace, you will actually come to the largest room in the palace, the 120-meter long Galerie des Batailles, which commemorates about 30 paintings of most of the great battles of French history from Clovis through Napoleon. This room is astonishing. These paintings are enormous. Definitely a surprise. I didn't actually know this existed until we walked through it. Super cool end to the walking tour. We actually visited here. We split this into 2 visits, and they were actually 3 years apart. If you look, we have a prior video that I did. We visited the first time we were here. We actually just went straight outside and saw the gardens, and we didn't even see all of it in a whole day. So I have another video that you can check out, which is more about mistakes to not make when visiting Versailles, and also maybe don't do it on your first day on the ground in France. So there were some mistakes made. I will include a link to that at the end of this video. And I hope this inspires you to go and see Versailles, but not only look around at all the gold gilded beauty, but dig into the history and the drama of the people who actually moved through this extravagant space during its heyday. So much here. There's so much history here, more than just the Hall of Mirrors and the gilded ceilings and the painted galleries. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.